My name is Natalie. This is my formative assessment video for the Explorer 1112. To begin, I'm working on the maxillary right buccal. I'm sitting between 1 and 2, and I pulled the cheek back for educational and grading purposes, but I'm going to be working on tooth number 3, and to start, I'm holding both my instruments in the modified pen grasp, and I'm going to retract the cheek. So I'm going to enter the mirror sideways and pull the cheek back. Then, to begin, I'm going to identify the correct working end, and to do that, I'm going to line it up with the distal buccal, or the distal side of the tooth, and I'm going to see if the terminal shank is up and over. So that looks correct to me. Also, the instrument is pointing out away from their face, so it's not lining up towards their ear. So I'm going to show you the incorrect side. It's not going up and over, and I'm holding the instrument more towards their face, and the shank isn't going up and over the tooth. So now that I've identified the correct working end, I'm going to start scaling. I'm placing my fulcrum finger closest to the site that I'm working on. So in this case, I'm working on tooth number 3. My closest is the premolars at 4 and 5. So I'm going to place my fulcrum finger or my ring finger on the occlusal surface. And I'm going to start at the distal buccal line angle. And like that. So I'm going to turn it in. I'm going to wrist rock and then roll as I make my way to the interproximal surface. And now that I'm here, I'm going to take it out, pivot, reposition my instrument, and I'm going to wrist rock and roll as I make my way to the proximal surface, so I'm hugging the tooth the entire time and I'm not going out to the gingiva. Now that I've done that, I'm going to sit at my option spot, which is at 3 or side. So reposition my chair. I'm turning my head away from me. You can still see that. My fulcrum finger is between, my mirror fulcrum is on 12 and 13. And then I'm going to flip the instrument on to the other side. And then I'm going to reposition. My fulcrum finger is on 2nd and 3rd molars. I'm going to start with the distal buccal, or the distal lingual angle. I'm going to wrist rock. And then I'm going to redo that actually. So here at the distal lingual, I'm going to wrist rock. And then I'm going to come out, rotate my instrument, and wrist rock. My way across, and I'm using my mirror to capture the light so I can see better. Alright, so for the maxillary left buccal, I'm sitting between 1 and 2. I'm going to reposition my chair. I am going to position the patient's head away from me. I'm retracting the mirror with the cheek. And I'm actually using the same side of my instrument for the right lingual and the left buccal. So it's parallel and coming up and over, parallel to the long axis of the tooth, and my shank is coming up and over. And I'll show you the incorrect side. Like that. It's going away from the tooth and it's not actually parallel. I'm working on tooth number 12, so I'm going to come up here. So that's not parallel, and the shank is coming away from the tooth, and I'm also holding the instrument towards the patient's face. But this end is parallel, and I'm holding the instrument away from their face, and the shank is coming up and over the tooth. So now that I've identified the correct working end, I'm gonna position my fulcrum finger closest to the tooth. I'm going to start with the distal buccal angle. So I'm gonna wrist rock and roll as I make my way to the proximal surface. So I'm there and I can't go any further. I'm gonna come out, pivot my fulcrum finger. And I'm going to reposition it and then come back towards the mesial. Wrist rock and roll. And then come out. So once I've completed the buccal side, I'm going to turn the patient's head away from me. I'm going to flip my instrument, and I'm still sitting between 1 and 2. I'm fulcruming on 4 and 5. My mirror fulcrum is on 4 and 5. I'm going to capture the light. Then identify that that's the correct working end. And then I'm going to start with the distal lingual. Wrist rock and roll. My way to the proximal. I'm going to come out. Pivot. Angle it. Wrist rock and roll. Then I'm going to come out. So that completes the maxillary, or the maxilla, by doing teeth numbers 3 and 12. So now I'm going to make my way to the mandible. I'm going to go to my start position, which is at 12. I'm going to reposition the patient's head in a neutral position. And I'm going to be working on tooth number 30, which is the mandibular right buccal. So I'm going to sit at 12 between 1 and 2. Patient's head is turned towards me. I'm just retracting the cheek, entering it sideways and pointing the cheek back. So I'm going to see if this is the correct working end. Alright, so that looks like the correct end because it's parallel and coming up and over the tooth that I'm working on. So now that I've identified the correct working end, I'm going to start with the distal buccal. My fulcrum finger is close to the tooth that I'm working on. And then I'm going to wrist rock. And roll. I'm going to come out. Pivot. Come out. And then for the mandibular right lingual, I'm sitting at 3. Patient's head is turned away from me. I'm fulcruming on either the side, mirror fulcrum on the side of the cheek, or on 12 and 13. And I'm just going to retract the tongue, illuminate the light. I'm going to flip the side of my instrument. Mirror fulcrum, or going to position my instrument fulcrum. Wrist rock my way across, pivot. Wrist rock and roll, so I'm always contacting the tooth. Now that I'm done, I'm going to do tooth number 18. I'm sitting between 1 and 2. Patient's head is turned away from me. I'm just retracting the cheek, so I'm going to enter the mirror sideways and pull the cheek back. And then I'm going to see if it's the correct working end by having it line up to the long axis of the tooth and having the shank go up and over the tooth that I'm working on. So that looks correct. I'm just going to show you what incorrect looks like. So that's incorrect. So correct, it's parallel. The terminal shank is parallel to the long axis of the tooth. The shank is going up and over, and the instrument that I'm holding is away from the person's face, so that's why it's the correct end as well. So I'm gonna fulcrum kind of on the closest I can. I know they're missing a tooth there. And get my modified pen grasp. I'm gonna start with the distal buccal line angle. Wrist rock and roll. Wrist rock and roll. Can't really see that. I'm gonna reposition my camera so it'll be a little shaky. I'm gonna try that again. So I can't really see that either. Okay. I don't know. I don't know how to position the camera. Lingual, flip it. Fulcruming, 5. Wrist rack. And roll.